Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is second day in the afternoon, after lunch. I hope everybody is still awake with the help of the Vietnamese coffee. Before we start, let me also join others to thank DAV for organizing this excellent event. We are going to discuss about blue and green economic cooperation on the session 7. Today, the world is facing triple planetary crisis, namely climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Intense economic activities also disrupting marine ecosystems. The adverse impact of this crisis towards marine environment and biodiversity is real. We should listen to the experts. Remember, important lessons learned from our experience in the last 2 years dealing with COVID-19. Only the experts and science can help us to guide the world to defeat the virus. And I think this is a very important lessons learned for us. The COP27s will build on the outcomes of COP26 to take further action in addressing climate emergency. Blue economy serves as our defense mechanism to mitigate, repair, and pursue our economic growth without further damaging ocean and seas. While acknowledging the need to ensure ocean sustainability and rules-based ocean governance, ASEAN has laid down its perspective on the blue economy to identify opportunities and steps toward operationalizing the ASEAN Leaders Declaration on Blue Economy. Today, our discussion will be guided by the following questions. Number one, how to engage relevant stakeholders for regional collaboration. Second, what do different blue economies outlooks by different stakeholders have in common? Third, what partnership should ASEAN establish with these countries? And today, to respond to those questions, we will invite 4 prominent speakers to share these views. Okay, and for the first one, I would like to introduce Dr. Ting Tuo from National Institute for South China Sea Studies. Dr. Ting Tuo, you have the screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for having me in the meeting. It's great to share my views on the Blue Partnership issue in this session. But in-person way is unique, so I hope with the adjustment of epidemic prevention policies of China, we can go back to the days when we sit together and talk next year. And with the increasing impact of climate change and marine pollution, marine ecologic and environmental problems have become increasingly prominent. At the same time, the development of marine science and technology, as well as the non-sustainable economic model, also consuming the marine resources rapidly. This has become one of the real challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals established by the UN. In the context of globalization, no country can stand alone. So once the coastal countries that depend on the sea for their livelihoods are troubled by marine problems, the entire international community will be affected. Whether it is the government, enterprises, or individuals, they have all become important stakeholders. That is to say, the solution to ocean problems needs full cooperation of the international community, which form the basis for the concept of the blue economy. According to the definition of the UN, a sustainable blue economy is an economy that promotes growth, maintains and improves people's living standards, and ensures the sustainable use of marine resources. In 2012, the UN Conference on Sustainable Development put forward the concept of blue economy for the first time, and it was quickly and widely accepted and advocated. In 2015, the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development clarified the development goals in the field of ocean governance. The concept of blue economy has further expanded the scope of a green economy, and the marine environmental issues have therefore received more attention. For China and the ASEAN countries, maritime cooperation is one of the driving forces for regional economic development. In recent years, blue economy has become a key area of cooperation between ASEAN and China. In the ASEAN-China Strategic Partnership Vision 2030 signed in 2018, the two sides agreed to strengthen cooperation in maritime science and technology, marine observation, and disaster prevention. At the ASEAN-China Special Summit last year, the two sides agreed to build a blue economic partnership. ASEAN also adopted the Blue Economy Declaration in October last year. Although the declaration mentioned the ASEAN countries will be committed to strengthening cooperation in the blue economy, but specific cooperation projects or mechanisms have not yet been put into practice. There are four main internal driving forces for China and ASEAN blue economy cooperation. The first is the need to jointly promote economic recovery under the COVID-19 epidemic, and the need to continuously deepen cooperation in the marine industry, and the need to maintain regional peace and stability, and to determine the path of cooperation in the form of law or policy. However, it should also be noted that marine cooperation will not take place only because of these inherent needs. In the past few decades, the blue economy cooperation between China and ASEAN, especially the maritime cooperation, has also been infected by the constraints from the geopolitical factors. In this sense, policy coordination and the institutional arrangement between the two sides are key issue. Under the current situation, to promote China and ASEAN blue economy partnership, is necessary to adhere to multilateralism and open regionalism to establish an open and inclusive regional cooperation structure. China should enhance the integration of interests with neighboring countries through more diverse and specific cooperation projects, and maintain a sufficient and stable supply of maritime public goods. Through positive view, common concepts, and successful practice, I believe China and ASEAN can reduce the negative impact of geopolitical factors on ocean governance. The South China Sea disputes are difficult to be resolved in a short term, but the cooperation between China and ASEAN under the framework of the Blue Partnership has great potential. The two sides can achieve mutual benefit and win-win results by steadily advancing marine aquaculture, marine fishery processing, marine transportation, even new energy, biomedicine, and environment protection. It is worthy to note that under the conference of the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, China and ASEAN also have great space to improve the level of cooperation. And to the sorry. And in the future, I think China and ASEAN could conduct consultations and take substantial steps toward the formal establishment of the bilateral blue partnership. And the two sides could deepen cooperation in marine industry, interconnection, early warning and disaster reduction, ecological protection, scientific innovation, so to enhance regional energy security and sustainable development. And it is also important to give full play to the respective advantages of government, industry, and academia, and carry out the policy communication. In terms of marine environmental protection, it's necessary to strengthen the cooperative relationship between the government and the private sectors. Also, the government enterprises and the social group could provide more diversified funding sources in marine pollution prevention. At the same time, China and ASEAN countries can provide financial support for the upgrade and transformation of the marine industry and the marine infrastructure out of funds under AIIB or the China ASEAN Investment Cooperation Fund. And in terms of marine biodiversity conservation, China and ASEAN can explore the establishment of a common fishery resources management and the conservation mechanism to support non-regional countries and international organizations to play a much more constructive role in the maintain marine biodiversity in the South China Sea. And in the field of maritime cooperation platform, China and the ASEAN countries can discuss the establishment of a cooperation mechanism for the coastal states of the South China Sea. The ideal solution of this mechanism would be to establish a South China Sea Coastal States Cooperation Committee through the conclusion of a legally binding agreement. However, in the short to a medium term, the littoral countries of the South China Sea can establish a relatively flexible cooperation forum between the littoral countries and concentrate resources to achieve cooperation results in the such areas, and then gradually promote the upgrading of this mechanism. Okay, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ting Tuo, for your presentation. You highlight the framework and mechanism for ASEAN and China to work together. And of course, we understand the challenges. We will discuss about how to effectively put that into implementation. And then we will invite Dr. Bapak Thomas Lukasuk from University of Warsaw. You have the floor, Pak.
Yes, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for this opportunity to participate in such an important event. And today, yes, thank you. Yes, what I would like to discuss is the European Union and ASEAN, because we are dealing with two big organizations, most integrated, with a view on the blue economy, with the role of the sea in not only in economy but also in environment and everyday life, as we can see here in Da Nang as well. But as putting it, let's say, in academic way, I would say if you take a look at the colors of ASEAN and of the European Union, they are blue. They are blue because the sea and the oceans are, let's say, the most spacious parts of our territories of both organizations. And speaking about this academic approach, I would like to discuss also the definition. Because if you take a look at the definitions of different international organizations, like World Bank or other United Nations institutions, you see that first of all, it's focusing on this cross-cutting concept and the sustainable use of many areas, interrelated, interconnected, and focus on the ocean ecosystem. It is extremely important and was also underlined in the United Nations Convention, the idea of common heritage and undividedness of the oceans, of the seas. It's important in the culture of sharing, in the culture of integration, in the culture of understanding the cooperation. That's why if you take a look at the definitions and the concept of the blue economies in European Union and ASEAN, you see that also you have all the sectors of economy combined with the environment and also the interests of all the stratas of the society. Especially in case of ASEAN, as you see, there is also focus on the human well-being and social equity. In the case of European Union, is more about economy, it's about shipbuilding, about maritime transport, and aquaculture. And if you take a look at the differences of the looks of the ASEAN and the European Union, you see that first of all, the size matters, because the South China Sea is much bigger than Mediterranean area, and the significance of water, it was I don't want to repeat what was already discussed yesterday and today about the significance of the waters of South China Sea, but the significance is incomparable to the significance of the Mediterranean. And also the role of extra regional players in fishing and exploiting the living and non-living resources. This is also incomparable if you take a look at the European Union and ASEAN. And last but not least, what we also discussed today is the number of territorial disputes over different zones and continental shelves in the South China Sea. We don't have such a situation in the European Union. We have this chapter already closed. But if you think that the chapter was closed, let's say 10 or 20 years ago, no. In case of my country, it was closed 2 years ago only. We finished our negotiations on the delimitation of our borders with all our neighbors. Speaking about the essentiality and the blue economy for the regions, it's really the important contributor to the economies of both regions, and it evaluates, and it's a bigger and bigger year by year. In the European Union, it's even, I would say, sometimes not only the contributor, but determinant of the role of the country and determinant sometimes of the membership. Me, myself, I witnessed a referendum in Norway on membership to the European Union. It was almost 30 years ago, but I still remember that in Norway, the most, let's say, critical issue on being or non-being member of the European Union was common fishery policy. And still is an important matter and some of the countries of the European Union, they enjoy exclusive rights not to be a part of this common fishery policy. For those countries who were the members, the full members of the European Union, we offer the multi-annual plans, the regional plans, differing from the areas. Because if we take a look at the Mediterranean and the North Sea, we see that you need bigger and smaller boats. And the same is with ASEAN, which has also its own, let's say, approach to the fishery, its own to the aquaculture, but you have to use different instruments if you are dealing with the open sea, and if you are dealing with shallow waters, as we discussed, with shallow waters of the South China Sea. And what was done and what could be done in the future, and what from my perspective, we have the cooperation started just recently in the second decade between ASEAN and the European Union, in the second decade of the 21st century. We have some mechanism of the economic cooperation, we have some mechanism of development assistance, we have dialogues, we are facilitating, we are also sharing our experience. It's important to understand and underscore the efforts to reduce, reuse, and recycle. It means that this economic use, the blue economy, should be as sustainable and as environmentally friendly as possible. And for me, within the framework of conclusion, I would say that from the European Union, we should focus on, first of all, shipbuilding, cold chain, transfer of technology, and also the stronger cooperation. Because if we take a look at the shipbuilding, you see that among the biggest shipyards in the world, we have European. Also in Poland, we have a lot. But if you take a look at the structure of the trade and investment, you cannot find anything about shipyards and shipbuilding, and this is the very important point for the future to develop from my perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bapak Thomas, for the presentation. I think you highlight the important points as the potentials and challenges for ASEAN to develop its blue economy, and learning from the success story of EU regional initiative on the implementation of the blue economy. I think it's good way for ASEAN to look to EU to develop their blue economy, not just to achieve a sustainable way for production, but I think at the same time can also access the EU market for the ASEAN economy. And then Our next speaker will be Dr. Axel Gotels. He is the Executive Director of European Institute for ASEAN Studies, Belgium. Dr. Gotels, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, when ASEAN adopted its declaration on blue economy in October 2021, the initiative should be assessed from an ASEAN perspective and has more chances of achieving its objectives when executed based on the ASEAN way, combined with its guiding principle of ASEAN centrality. This decision-making approach based on consensus building and consultation is what keeps ASEAN going. With well-defined goals in terms of further regional integration, the concept of blue economic development, if well implemented, could serve as an important stimulus for ASEAN to drive sustainable economic growth and innovation while strengthening regional solidarity and resilience. It would be therefore essential to focus its objectives for implementation on deliverable outcomes and less on too ambitious or overly conceptually idealistic promises. The implementation of the blue economy would moreover be a rewarding exercise to prove that the ASEAN way model can deliver on its promises. ASEAN seems very conscient about this, as it's in a declaration on blue economy. It tasks the ASEAN Coordinating Council, ACC, to oversee the overall implementation and develop modalities for cooperation on the blue economy. To achieve its objectives in the blue economy, it will be crucial for ASEAN to implement functional, organizational, and financial structures and instruments. The creation of an ASEAN Investment Bank, ASIP, could therefore be a highly promising initiative to provide the necessary financial backbone to make the Blue Economic Initiative an ASEAN success story. Until now, it will be challenging for ASEAN to implement the realization of its Blue Economy plan, as it depends predominantly on external financing from mainly multilateral financial institutions such as the European Investment Bank, the Asian Development Bank, ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the World Bank, among others. The interest of these multilateral development banks to contribute financially depends on whether they can project their own objectives and values in the related projects, while these do not necessarily correspond to ASEAN's own agenda and core interests. Similar initiatives in attempting to establish an ASEAN investment bank have already been launched before, such as, for example, the ASEAN Development Fund in 2005, the China ASEAN Investment Corporation Fund in 2009, and the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund with the ADB in 2012. For different reasons, these initiatives did not always fully achieve their real potential. Therefore, it should be really interesting for ASEAN for its own further strong perception of its own identity, to look into this kind of initiative of developing its own ASEAN Investment Bank. Nevertheless, in the meantime, international financial frameworks and technologies have experienced extensive evolutions and innovations. Hence, building on the experiences of such initiatives while applying the newest financial technological know-how could provide a momentum to build an independent ASEAN-owned financial framework to deliver on its blue economy agenda in an ASEAN way. The basic principles of the ASEAN blue economy concept are closely aligned with contemporary internationally acclaimed values such as sustainability, rules-based governance, sustainable economic growth and innovation. Therefore, if this initiative of the ASEAN Investment Bank is well conceived, it could become a real game changer for ASEAN to achieve its blue economy agenda and other initiatives. While the global blue and green economy conceptual principles are laudable, we should not fail to observe that the developed countries outsourced already many years ago their polluting and labor-intensive industries to developing countries, especially in Asia. While consumers in developed countries benefit from cheap produced products and pretend complying with the highest environmental standards, it's easy to shift the blame to developing countries of polluting the planet and not complying with the most basic labor standards. It can be noted that US, for instance, is still the world's largest historical emitter of greenhouse gases. ASEAN countries should therefore be very careful while developing their blue and green economy concepts and strategies not to fall in the trap of green and blue washing. A lot of marketing, spin, hypocrisy and use of multiple standards is involved here. Of the 50 shades of blue, it's very vital for ASEAN to choose the right shade of blue in its implementation and how to engage relevant stakeholders and partnerships. In their declaration on the blue economy, the ASEAN leaders agreed to welcome support from external partners, with ASEAN acting as a driving force at the core. Moreover, in the last decade, there has been a significant increase in ASEAN's trade and investment relations with the European Union. The EU has become ASEAN's third largest trading partner and also emerged as an essential provider of foreign direct investment to the region. In this context, there is a lot of potential and leverage for the EU to engage with ASEAN in its commitment towards a blue economy. The EU has committed itself to further engage with its Indo-Pacific partners on an open, sustainable and rules-based trade in the light of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. The progress made on the free trade agreements between the ASEAN countries and the EU could act as a vehicle to not only boost blue growth, but also strengthen sustainable development in the region. This has been the case in Singapore and Vietnam, currently the only ASEAN countries with completed free trade agreements with the EU in place. Vietnam, being one of the first ASEAN countries having concluded in a very short time frame its FTA with the EU, and they should be congratulated for that, can be really seen as a positive example for the other ASEAN members to pursue their FTA negotiations with the EU. In this context, the EU has begun already talks with both Indonesia and the Philippines and further agreed to resume negotiations with Thailand. These agreements could be an opportunity for ASEAN to cooperate with the EU to introduce blue initiatives to create an alignment with the European Green Deal, including many elements that could be applicable to the region. The EU's new generations FTAs aim to foster sustainable development, covering both labor and environmental related aspects of trade. The EU has also already concluded comprehensive partnerships and cooperation agreements with 6 ASEAN countries, which also contain provisions on sustainable development. As a result, the FTAs and partnership agreements have further embedded sustainable green and blue development in the EU-ASEAN partnership. This can make it a valuable and useful tool to further push blue economic development in Asia with the EU. The EU could utilize also its resources and expertise in green policy design to assist ASEAN in identifying and implementing effective projects on sustainability. Moreover, including blue initiatives in these agreements would also go hand in hand with the ASEAN EU Plan of Action 2018-2022. ASEAN could use EU's expertise and tools for creating a framework of EU initiatives to support ASEAN's blue development, therefore. Contributing to a sustainable and inclusive development of ASEAN, as well as ensuring a blue transition and connectivity of infrastructure through digital innovation, would also be in line with at least 4 of the 8 objectives of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. In particular, the EU's Global Gateway places the interest of recipient states of investments at the core of its program. All right, thank you very much, and I would really wish to give my special thanks to the Diplomatic Academy for all their support and their organization of this 14th International Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Goethals. You highlight three important points. ASEAN-style rules-based order proven successful in managing regional issues. And now the question is how to apply it to further achieve concrete goals of ASEAN-style blue economy. And then you also underline the importance of innovative financing to maximize the potential of the blue economy, as well as the role of FTAs, including RCEP, to facilitate sustainable development of the blue economy cooperation. Thank you for that. And our last speaker today will be Captain Daniel Simon. He is the NOAA liaison to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Captain Simon, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. And I want to thank the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for inviting me and then bringing me here to speak to you on the blue economy. My perspective on the blue economy, I'm not a diplomat, I'm not an academic, I'm a mariner with a background in geology and atmospheric chemistry. So I know how to collect data. And I've spent much of my time out at sea throughout my career, in the waters mostly of the US, but also of some of your nations as well. And although I didn't know it at the time, I was contributing to the blue economy, collecting that data, as the blue economy that really wasn't coined until 2012 at the UN Conference of Sustainability in Rio. But I worked for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and when I joined NOAA, I was surprised that this scientific organization that does hard science, writes peer-reviewed papers, was in the Department of Commerce within NOAA, the part of the government that promotes economic prosperity. You know, in my younger mind, money corrupted science. But as I grew older and realized knowledge is power, and putting that power in the area where you can grow your economy, that's really powerful. And so to me, the concept of blue economy comes down to four things. Collect good data, and good is relative. Good, you know, if you're trying to get a VLCC into your port, your data better be good, and it better be right for that ship to get in there. But if you're looking at something 500 meters under the surface, you can be a little more flexible. So collect good data. Use that data to make informed decisions. Use those decisions to sustainably use the ocean to grow your economy. And we'll hit on a couple more things, but yeah, collect good data to inform decisions to sustainably use the ocean to grow your economy. And there's various other definitions of the blue economy. One of the best, I think, is from ASEAN, where they take those 4 points and then they add to improve human well-being and social equity. We should all aspire to be that. We should all aspire to do that with the data that we collect. Beyond their definition, I'll look to the definition of my boss, Dr. Rick Spinrad, who's the head of NOAA. And he says that the new blue economy is a knowledge-based economy looking at the sea not just for extraction of material goods, but for data and information to address societal challenges and inspire their solutions. So now we collect good data to inform decisions, to sustainably use the ocean, to grow economies, to improve human well-being and equity, and to inspire solutions to societal challenges. Fantastic. And so then I'll quickly go through the definition that we saw earlier from the World Bank. And to me, the World Bank leaves out the foundation of the blue economy, collecting good data to inform decisions. And they get right to growing your economy and economic growth, which is important, don't get me wrong. And in the US, that value has been definitely shown. In 2018, the maritime economy of the US grew faster than the rest of the economy. And the blue economy at $373 billion that year is expected to double by 2030. And that's the directly related maritime value. And if you would include all the goods and services that go in and out of ports, that value is a lot bigger. But for specifically maritime economy, the Bureau of Economic Analysis within the U.S. totals it at $373 billion in 2018. But these are your contributing sectors, and the biggest one there is tourism and recreation, which includes recreational fishing, diving, ecotourism. These are your stakeholders. These are the economies that develop with the data that they can then take and make those decisions to invest where they can. It starts with the foundation of open source. In my case, within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, when I would take a ship underway and I would turn on the sensors on that vessel, some of that data went directly through satellite to the internet and could be used publicly by anyone in the United States or around the world. A lot of those data need to be quality controlled, and that doesn't happen, but open source data is the foundation, to me, in growing the blue economy. I'm not smart enough to know what people will do with data. Even military data, like the SOSUS data that was talked about earlier in this conference, no one knew at the time that not only did it identify submarines, but it identified every humpback whale in the Atlantic Ocean. Additionally, using the technology from those hydrophones, we can now relatively accurately know when certain subsea volcanoes will erupt. So the whole bioacoustics, the scientific bioacoustics and geologic bioacoustics from an application that was never meant for it. The government agencies and the private sector are hungry for this data. At no time should a wind turbine be put on a fish nursery. At no time should construction projects on the coast be considered without, at this point, considering what's going to happen with sea level rise. There are some parts of my country that the word climate change or the words climate change don't resonate very well, but I would argue that putting an airstrip in a place where sea level rise will cover it for part of the year, it's just not going to happen anymore. Engineering companies won't do that. And so the data of the assessments of what will happen, they're necessary. Additionally, I'll say that you cannot take care of your people if the people are uncertain that their livelihoods will be there tomorrow. And so the U.S. government can't do this alone. And so we have public-private partnerships and international partners. For one, fish, weather, pollution, they have no idea what geopolitical borders are. And so you have to work together. You have to be cooperative. And there are venues for this. For bathymetry, there's the hydrographic, or for weather, there's the World Meteorological Organization. And then there's other avenues through JEBCO or the Nippon Foundation with the Seabed 2030 initiative to map the entire world by 2030. All this data is crucial, and the U.S. has worked with folks like Saildrone that we were introduced to earlier today. And while Saildrone is a proprietary group and their vehicles do what they do, the packages on board that collect the data were bench tested at NOAA, and now those vessels can be force multipliers for any research that occurs. There are challenges. There's so much data now. Every satellite that gets sent up in the air, every hydrographic survey that's done, it literally creates tens of terabytes every day. And what do you do with that data? Even if it's good data, unless it can get to a user, it's like you never collected it. And so to put together the infrastructure with which to harness that data, with which the power of that data to create the economies that you're looking for, to improve the livelihoods of people, to inspire the solutions to societal challenges, you have to have the network to move that data to the people that need it. Additionally, the biggest challenge for all of us is time. And for some things, we may be too late. We didn't get the data early enough to make the informed decisions, to use the ocean sustainably, to grow our economies in the way that put humankind in a good place. But there's still a lot that could be done, and there's vast benefits to collecting the good data to make those informed decisions to use the ocean correctly. Here's one example off of Hawaii, where I live right now. There was a lot of frustration among the fishing community for the introduction of the Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument by George Bush in the early 2000s, and even more frustration when President Obama increased the size of it drastically a few years ago. But what we've seen now is that that place, that marine protected area, is such an important ecosystem for the creation of more and more fish that fish stocks around Hawaii have grown to the point where they are 54% for yellowfin tuna increased for the fishermen. Additionally, hurricane forecasting continues to get better and continues more and more data under the surface of the ocean, on the surface of the ocean, in the air and above the hurricane, both above the clouds and in space, to collect the information. And evacuating an area because of a hurricane is a big deal. And so it costs a lot of money, and taking those people away means your emergency response is taken away as well. So to be able to forecast exactly where that hurricane is going to go is super important. And so to have this economic growth, collect good data to inform decisions, to use the ocean sustainably, to grow your economy, and improve human well-being and equity, and inspire the solutions to societal problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Simon. You highlight, I think, the most important point to start something, to understand what we are doing, to have the right data, to use the science correctly, and also technology, of course. And I think this is something that if this, unfortunately, not everything depend on the scientists. We need to deal with the politician, officials, countries. So hopefully more and more we can rely on science to solve the problem in front of us. So those are the 4 speakers. Now we open the floor for questions. Number 1, please, sir, at the back.
James Borton from Johns Hopkins University, the SICE program, and the Foreign Policy Institute. I am so glad that we had science prevail this afternoon to inform policy development. This question is really directed to Dr. Ding, but perhaps the other panelists would weigh in. Professor Ding, you've written extensively about sustainability and conservation measures. What's the likelihood in 2023, particularly with the environmental degradation getting worse here in the South China Sea, that China might adopt a bilateral marine protected area initiative with your neighbor Vietnam? I've been told that some Vietnamese marine biologists and Chinese marine biologists are already communicating and cooperating, because we know that science is a universal language. So I guess my question to you, and perhaps the other panelists might address this, is are we going to see any developments in terms of marine protected areas where there's cooperation, whether it be on a bilateral basis with your neighbor Vietnam or with others here in the South China Sea? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I will invite 2 more questions, please, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador. In our region, apart from the ASEAN Declaration on Blue Economy, we have the integrated maritime policy introduced by EU. Then we have the Belt and Road initiative introduced by China. And we have recently the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework introduced by the USA. My question is, in the context of major power rivalry ongoing in our region, what kind of leverage that ASEAN can be able to use to maintain its driving force in achieving objective of its blue economy. Thank you.
Who you address your question to?
In the context of the major power rivalry,
No, I mean, you address one of the speakers?
any panelist.
Any of them? Okay, thank you. One more, please, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm Putinka from Hanoi University of Natural Resource and Environment. And my question directed to Dr. Ding Duo. In fact, as I said this morning, that the South China Sea is a large marine ecosystem. This means that we have to manage on the entire ecosystem. That one is a very essential element of the blue economy. Because if we cut the ecosystem into pieces, we are not successful manage it. And but your approach is bilateral partnership, not multilateral. And I suppose that we should do the multilateral partnership, not bilateral. So my question is, why do you propose the bilateral partnership instead of multilateral partnership? Thank you.
Okay. I will invite Dr. Ting Tuo to address the two questions specifically addressed to you. Please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the questions. As to the first question, from my view, I think cooperation in maritime science and maritime environmental protection is the content of the DOC, and is also a requirement for coastal states to cooperate under Article 123 of the UNCLOS. South China Sea maritime cooperation is requested by this treaty and the political documents. As I know, between China and Vietnam, China and Philippines, there are already lots of maritime environmental protection between the scientific researchers, between the scientific department. But yes, as we talk about this issue in yesterday and this morning, such an issue always connected with the disputes of the South China Sea. But what we should think is to try to improve the environmental of the South China Sea maritime situation, and how to handle the disputes between the China and the other claimants. It can be separated or not. For the scientific researchers, or from the view of fishery preservation, there is no boundary. There is no territory sovereignty disputes. So I remember that some participants mentioned the fishery ban initiated by China in the past few years. But from our view, the most purpose or achievements in the past year is the preservation of the fishery resources. So what I want to say is we should try to reduce the geopolitical factors when we talk about the scientific cooperation, especially marine scientific cooperation. And as to the likelihood of the consensus between China and Vietnam in 2030, I think it depends on the two sides' political will. If we look back to the joint development between China and Vietnam a few days ago, initiated by the two governments, there are a lot of statements or terminology on the maritime issue. If we look back the negotiation of the DOC, even the process of the COC, we will find that such political will can overcome the disputes or even the difficulties of technical issue. That's my thoughts on for the first question. And the second question is, I don't remember I put forward a bilateral approach. I think the Coastal States Maritime Cooperation Forum of the South China Sea, littoral of the South China Sea committees, it is a multilateral approach. So I don't think it is a bilateral approach. And of course, regarding to the disputes over maritime delimitation, maritime delimitation and sovereignty disputes, Chinese official position is to dealing with these disputes through the negotiation and the consultation. It is to some extent a bilateral approach, but to maintain the stability of the South China Sea and to promote the maritime cooperation, especially the functional cooperation, I think multilateral ways is much better. And the practice of the China and ASEAN has also proved that the approach is effective. Thank you.
Thank you. It's quite clear, Dr. Ting Tuo. So I would like to invite other speakers to respond to the question number 2 before we open to the next round of questions. Please, who want to respond first? Bapak Thomas? Or Captain Simon? Oh, okay. Question number 2 about the ASEAN declaration, different concept with the EU, China, US, and among the major power rivalries, what are the leverage of ASEAN?
Yeah, from my perspective, the leverage of ASEAN in the blue economy in dealing with the big power is having a seat at the table. Like we all discussed. I mean, fish, weather, pollution, they don't adhere to geopolitical borders, and we have to work together. And so having a seat at the table to learn from one another, to cooperate, to share, I think is the big leverage. ASEAN is a region, and you can't have accurate global models without dealing with the regions, with all of the regions of the world. It just doesn't work. And so to me, the leverage is having a seat at the table, honestly.
Okay, you want to add something, Dr. Gotels?
Well, in fact, when I look to it, it's more the issue of the US-China rivalry. And in fact, ASEAN is in fact part of the proxy game. So it's in fact for ASEAN very important to keep a very neutral stance in this rivalry. But for doing that, I would say ASEAN should really strengthen its own cooperation and develop further its own identity with really structural initiatives and measures to become really, as I would say, has the means to be recognized as a very neutral player between those two superpowers rivalry.
Thank you, very useful. Bapak Thomas, you want to add something?
Certainly, yes. I mean, if you would like to be competitive, I mean, in terms of the blue economy and the tourism, aquaculture, fishery, so you have to modernize of your infrastructure in all those sectors, and without it, you would be really dependent on all those big players coming into your sea and overfishing everything you have, and taking all the best you have on your disposal. That's why I discuss in my presentation the shipbuilding, because as you know, the more than 90% of your fishing boats are those boats who are only one day fishing, and they cannot compete with the big trawlers and the big modern fishing big fishing vessels from extra regional players. And the same with aquaculture, and the same with tourism, with the big ships coming and also using your waters. And this would be the key issues. I mean, to make you more competitive, also more influensive. And if you modernize the infrastructure, you can also influence deeper and bigger the way of the sustainable use of living resources, especially living resources of South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very useful for ASEAN to learn more and how to develop its blue economy. I will invite 3 more questions from the room. Please, sir.
Thank you. Bradley Merg from the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace. For Dr. Ding Duo, you've laid out a very broad number of areas where China can cooperate in the South China Sea in terms of blue economy. You specifically note early warning, preparedness, and conservation. At the same time, this isn't really a tabula rasa sort of situation. There is a contemporary, not oceanic, but a riparian parallel here, which is, of course, the Mekong River. China has made commitments regarding hydrological data sharing. China has made commitments regarding dam data, et cetera. And while China has given a very large amount of aid, many of its commitments on data sharing have not been fulfilled. At the same time, multinational work, such as Eyes on the Earth's Mekong Dam Monitor, have been regularly attacked by many individuals within China. How is it possible, in your view, for China to move ahead and to create confidence by particularly figures from the lower Mekong states who have seen commitments made and not fulfilled? What are the next steps to move ahead such that blue economy cooperation actually can succeed, data sharing can succeed, and trust can be built so that this can be successful for all? Thank you.
I think I would like to invite Dr. Ding Duo to specifically respond to these questions about Mekong, right? Please, Dr. Ding Duo, you have the floor.
Thank you for your question. And actually, I'm not quite sure about the Mekong mechanism, cooperation mechanism situation, but I think there is biggest differences between South China Sea and Mekong River. As I mentioned before, the maritime disputes and the territorial disputes still exist, and there is no possibility to be resolved in a quite short term. So I think right now the political will and the mutual trust is quite important. Some participants mentioned that the big power in the South China Sea. I think if we look at the international media, the Western reports, there are some news mentioned that the Chinese political will or geopolitical will upon the Mekong mechanism cooperation. But I think that is a misleading or a misunderstanding to China's position. The same thing happens in the South China Sea. Each time China try to promote some cooperation, maritime cooperation committee or multilateral or mechanism, there are also some different views, different voices to question that what's the Chinese real attention behind this. So as I said, there is too much geopolitical factors or consideration in this area. From the key point, that is a traditional security question, traditional security issue. Territory disputes maritime delimitation. But in fact, by the big power or competition or confrontation, and then the improvement of Chinese maritime ability, different wars has affected the South China Sea's maritime cooperation. So in this sense, what we should do, I think, the mutual trust by a step-by-step measures can be conducted to improve the mutual trust between China and Vietnam, China and the Philippines. If we look at the Chinese and Vietnam statement, the two sides try to build a hotline to control the emergencies on fishery incident in the South China Sea. So that is the first step. So in the future, I think such trust building measures can be conducted by not only China, but also between the parties of the ASEAN. And then a multilateral mechanism can be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ding Duo. I fully agree with you that we need to promote more dialogue and build trust. And I would like, before I go to the online questions, I would like to invite two more from the room. Yes, sir. Professor?
Thank you.
And you after that.
I have a question directed to Captain Simon. I think he's the best person to answer this, though it's open to other panelists. It's a broad and it's a very broad question relating to this actual sustainability of the use of ocean resources, because we have seen the situation of declining fishing stocks worldwide. In some areas, the decline has been catastrophic. It's a big problem in the South China Sea. And outside those marine preservation areas you mentioned, it's, there's little idea or little concept of sustainability. It's just a free-for-all, apparently. Now, the second issue I'd like you to address, and that is seabed mining. No one has mentioned it. I understand this is an emerging issue, particularly in the Arctic. So what is your response to that? Thank you.
Thank you. The next one, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Phương from Vietnam. And because the topic of this section is related to economic and sustainable development, so I just have a general comment. I would like to draw your attention to the fishery subsidies agreement, which is adopted at WTO Ministerial Conference this June in Geneva. The adoption of this agreement is welcome, but it also recognizes the need to develop further provisions in subsequent meetings of the negotiation group, especially provisions on special and differentiated treatment. In the context that Vietnam and some countries in South China Sea region have undeveloped fishing vessels or mostly conducting artisanal fisheries, I think there should be further research on this topic, as well as the impact assessment of this agreement. Moreover, I also think that there should be better coordination in the future negotiations among those countries to have consolidated proposals that reflect the spirit of special and differentiated treatment in the agreement. So this agreement is new, and if any speaker have views or assessment on this agreement, I'm very happy to hear your sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to invite Captain Simon to respond to the question number 2.
Yeah, to the question of sustainability. Can we be sustainable with the pressures on the ocean environment? You know, and I realize that I can't speak towards some of the pressures in the South China Sea. I can speak to, you know, where the U.S. has again gone to the data and and to make informed decisions, to make tough decisions. This year in the Bering Sea, the entire king crab fishery was shut down. That is a massive economic blow, but it was deemed necessary in order to sustain the species. And those tough decisions have to happen in order for sustainability to occur. That also, it's not just tough decisions, it's gaining the trust of your stakeholders, of the commercial fishermen, of the downstream effects of shutting things off, of giving it time to heal, to reproduce, whatever. You know, can it be sustainable? Yeah, sure. If pressures are just too great, it's not gonna work. But have the good data to make the decisions to turn things off. And I realize that that's not always an option, as you need to feed your population, but that's where the policymakers need to find other avenues. Regarding deep sea mining, yeah, I mean, that's the part of UNCLOS why the United States hasn't signed on. And I'd argue to look to the experiments, I guess you could call them, that have been done, those by Germany in the 80s off of South America, and since then, and use that knowledge to make the decisions on whether to move forward. The moratorium that's potentially out there in deep sea bed mining, going down there and industrially mining the minerals down there will potentially create environmental disaster if not done right. And so, and that environmental disaster will last for years. And so, again, have data prepared to make that decision, because that has a huge effect on the entire planet that will not follow geopolitical borders.
Thank you, Captain Simons. I would like to invite other speakers if you have comment on the last questions about fishery subsidy under WTO Ministerial Conference.
Yes, I mean,
Bapak
if
Thomas,
you are
please.
speaking about subsidies, it's always about the European Union, I think, yes. Yes, but we have to remember that in the European Union, as I said already in my presentation, so we have a differentiated approach, because we have in the Mediterranean, we have the majority of small boats. So, and those small boats and the individual owners, they are released. And they're released from the quotas, and also they are receiving subsidies. And in the Northern Sea, in the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, they have the owners of the bigger boats, the shipping boats. They have let's say very strict quotas, and they don't have subsidies. But I would say this way. We could think about the releasing the system of subsidies if we organize the system of fishing in a better way. I mean, the captain already discussed the IOTC. I mean, also the Indian Ocean, also the Pacific Ocean, blue tuna cooperation. And they are trying also to monitor it. But if you have with the small boats and the one-day fishing, it's how you can explain those people that they have to really survive when they have to deal with the big trawlers, and for them it's a matter of existence. I mean, of survival, existential survival. So if we are speaking about sustainability, if we are speaking about also the equity, so let us discuss it in this way. So certainly we have to limit the subsidies, but we cannot just resign subsidies, because we have to think about those who are most vulnerable and less developed. Also I'm speaking also about the countries from South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you. I think talking about subsidy, it is really about the fair treatment between the small one and the big one, how to level the playing field. And do you want to add something, Dr. Gutels? No? Okay. All right. Now I would like to address questions from online questions. The first one to Dr. Ting Tuo. What are the opportunities for ASEAN's blue economy from China's Belt and Road Initiative? The next one will goes to Dr. Axel Gutels. How do you find the convergence between the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy and ASEAN's blue economy? And the third one to Captain Simon. How does ASEAN's blue economy benefit from the recently established ASEAN-US Comprehensive Strategic Partnership? Dr. Ting Tuo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. According to the data released by the Chinese General Administration of Customs on October 24th, trade between China and the ASEAN maintained growth from January to September this year, reaching US dollar more than 700 billion, an increase of 3.8% year on year. On this growth rate, the trade volume between China and ASEAN will reach about 1 trillion this year, a record high, demonstrating that the vitality and the resilience of the economy and the trade cooperation between the two sides. From this perspective, I think that it's not only for the ASEAN's opportunity, it's for the both sides. And at present, the close economic and trade relations between China and ASEAN, as each other's largest trading partners, have played an important role in jointly handling the situation of the increasing negative factors in the global economy. For ASEAN, I think this basis is mainly concentrated in 4 areas. The first is about the upgrading of marine infrastructure, and second is the improvement of marine science and technology innovation capabilities. And the third is the improvement of people's livelihood in the context of the COVID-19 epidemic. And the fourth is conducive to ASEAN playing a greater role in the global ocean governance, since ASEAN has a very clear need to improve the global ocean governance system. This is my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also, I would like to make some comments on the fishery subsidies issue. So for the more than 2 decades, the formulation of international rules on fisheries subsidies has been an important topic in the WTO agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. Although there is much consensus among WTO members on the impact of harmful subsidies on the sustainable of marine resources, the biggest difficulty in the negotiations was how to balance the interests of all parties, the public nature of fishery resources, the complexity of the division of transboundary fishery rights, and the maritime rights and the interests of various countries, make it difficult to bridge the differences between the parties on the issue of fishery subsidies. And a country may be developed in one area, but is still considered developing in another. So the issue of fishery subsidies goes beyond the traditional WTO negotiation, in which developed and developing countries are divided, presenting a complex mix of interests. So the WTO parties have finally reached an agreement on the fishery subsidies through joint efforts, which once again prove that the importance of promoting true multilateralism and the strengthening international cooperation in the field of global ocean governance. And we will also promote the equal rights and opportunities for development of all countries and regions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Now I give the floor to Dr. Gutels.
Yes, Well, the question is, how would I found the convergence between the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy and ASEAN's blue economy? I would say there are a lot of similarities between the economic tissues of ASEAN and the EU. Both are very strongly based on SMEs as a really economic environmental tissue. And I would say this would be a real basis to develop further strategic frameworks between ASEAN and the EU, because they are really the drivers for sustainability as well as blue and green economy, but also to protect, in fact, the interest of, as here my colleague said, the smaller fishery industry against big trawlers, problems in fishing. The EU has a very zero tolerance strategy and approach for the IUUs. This could be also help on working and strengthening ASEAN position in the blue economy for the fishing industry. I would say there is a lot of potential between the EU and ASEAN because they have, in fact, both are, in fact, based, I would say, on a more consensus-building approach, and it should be good to work in a more constructive, positive, I would say, approach, because we have been talking the last 2 days about mainly issues and problems, and I would say more in the negative way about big rivalries and other big geopolitical issues. It could be good for having this convergence between ASEAN and the EU to give a more positive, constructive approach also to all those issues in the, I would say, here in the South China Sea.
Thank you, Dr. Goethals. Bapak Thomas, you want to add something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Yes, so first of all, do not quote me. We need more money, because if you take a look at the statistics and how much European Union spends on the programs we mentioned, it's between 10 to 50 million euro. And looking at the scale, we need much more. But hopefully will be let's say, now there's a new financial perspective within the European Union. We'll have more funds to be spent. I mean, not triple, not quadruple, but more and more, maybe 10 times bigger than before. This first thing, and the second comment is that we have in the Indo-Pacific strategy, we have the centrality of ASEAN, and we have to focus both in ASEAN and European Union, not at the, as my colleague also mentioned, not at those top levels and the biggest players, but we have to go with all those programs to the local level. And we have to start from the local level, to the local communities of fishermen. We have to help them to sustain, and we have to help them to develop. Then we can think about bigger perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. The problem is money is limited, right? So the ASEAN countries, I think, would love to invest more on sustainability as long as there is no more military presence in our region, so we can go to the right investment. Thank you. Captain Simon?
Yeah, for this last question, how does ASEAN's blue economy benefit from the recently established ASEAN-US Comprehensive Strategic Partnership? I'll admit that I'm not totally prepared to answer this, but I would argue from what I know of American strategy that we're interested in a free and open Indo-Pacific. And so the access that any strategic partnership brings with regard to technology, with regard to resources, to enhance any nation's ability to protect its own sovereignty, environmental security is part of that.
Okay, thank you. We still have 5 minutes. I will not open the floor, but instead I would like to invite all the speakers maybe want to say closing points for your point of this session. Please, you may start. Yeah, maybe I will invite Dr. Ting Tuo first. Maybe you have a closing point, Dr. Ting Tuo, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think just one sentence. China and both the climate states in the South China Sea should put the disputes in a proper position. It's not the main stream of the relationship between China and ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you. Bapak Thomas?
Yes, thank you. We have an institutional framework of very good institutional framework of cooperation between European Union and ASEAN, but we need more investments from the European Union side, investing in not only, let's say, pure blue economy, in the economic side, but also the environmental sides, recycling, the use of plastic, garbage, and everything related also to the blue economy, and we'll have success within the decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gotels?
As my colleague also said, it's also a lot about money. But as I already mentioned in my expose, it would be interesting to strengthen the ASEAN identity by institutional measures such as, for instance, setting up a real ASEAN-owned investment bank. And I think that would be good for ASEAN identity, but also to structure from their own agenda, I would say, the possibilities for financing their blue economy and sustainability. Already you have, for instance, with Singapore, a financial center with a lot of high-tech financial know-how. You have countries which have already in ASEAN also important financial means. So it would be very important and interesting to structure them around, I would say, like an initiative like an ASEAN Investment Bank, which can then have and finance the own blue economy agenda of ASEAN. And I think also European member states and the European Union would be very willing to assist in helping ASEAN to structure an initiative like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Captain Simon.
Yeah, to grow the blue economy within the region, I would encourage the sharing of data and the sharing of information openly. No one of us is smart enough to know what information will do, and while it may not be used collaboratively and may be used in ways that you didn't intend, when given to the commercial world, when given to industry, amazing things can happen, and amazing collaborative efforts can happen to help solve very large problems. And so that's my advice, is to encourage the building of trust and the sharing of data amongst each other to deal with the South China Sea as a whole and encourage the growth of blue economies in every nation.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, so those are the conclusion of the session 7. So certainly ASEAN, through Indonesia's chairmanship next year, I'll make sure the government in Jakarta fully aware of our discussion today, so that the ASEAN will lead regional effort in advancing blue economy and provide inclusive climate action. Thank you for all the attentions, and please join me to thank all the speakers.